The restaurant sat tucked just off a main road outside Boston, one of those places that tried to live in the middle, not fancy enough to intimidate, not cheap enough to be forgettable. Dim lights glowed against wood-paneled walls, soft jazz spilled from hidden speakers, and the smell of butter, seafood, and frying oil lingered like an invitation. I arrived early, as usual. My friend texted me that she'd be late, stuck in traffic, maybe 20 minutes or more. That didn't bother me. I've never minded waiting alone in a restaurant. In fact, it's something I secretly enjoy. There's a theater to dining out. Every table holds a play in progress, every booth its own little stage. Couples negotiate, families argue quietly, coworkers gossip. I get to sit back and watch. That night, the best show wasn't mine. It unfolded right beside me. The host guided a young couple to the booth directly adjacent. They looked mid-20s, dressed for a first meeting that mattered just enough. She in a neat blouse and subtle makeup, he in a plain polo that looked like it had been pulled from the laundry basket. I realized quickly this was no anniversary dinner or casual meetup. It was a first date probably from an app, and I happened to be sitting close enough to overhear nearly everything. He sat across from me to my left where I could see him clearly. Heavyset, pale skin, a bright red beard that drew the eye. His posture suggested either exhaustion or permanent disinterest, shoulders slumped, chin tilted down, eyes wandering. He ordered a whiskey cocktail within a minute of sitting. She sat beside me, facing him. From my angle, I could see her profile. Bright, expressive eyes, an eager but nervous smile, the kind of energy that tries to set the tone for the night. She ordered wine with her meal, but the server brought it early. She laughed, thanked them anyway, and accepted it with grace. The contrast hit me instantly. She smiled across the table, soft but hopeful. He grunted. She tried a small joke about the weather, Boston's famous drizzle making everyone late. He nodded without words, sipping his drink. The conversation died before it began. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but the way sound carried in the booth, it was impossible not to hear. And once I started, I couldn't look away. Their interaction wasn't just awkward, it was lopsided. She leaned forward, eager, hands folded carefully, asking questions to spark connection. He leaned back, half sunk into the cushion, giving answers so short they almost canceled her effort. First time using an app, she confessed, voice bright but a little shaky. I wasn't sure I'd even go through with it. Been on a lot, he replied flatly. Silence pooled like spilled water. Do you want to know anything about me? She asked after a pause, her voice rising slightly, testing the air for warmth. He shrugged. Sure, like what? I found myself pulling out the little notebook I often carry. Normally, I use it on subway rides or during solo lunches, jotting down scenes like sketches. This time, the impulse felt almost automatic. I wanted to capture this imbalance, the bravery of someone showing up, meeting a stranger with open hands, and the equally strong force of someone else refusing to meet them there. By the time my pen scratched the page, I knew I was watching more than dinner. I was watching two people collide, one trying to ignite a spark, the other dampening every match before it caught fire. The air between them carried tension I could almost feel from my seat. She tried again, leaning forward slightly, hands clasped loosely on the table. So, what do you do? She asked, voice gentle, hoping to draw him into a story. Plumbing, he said flatly as if reading from a list. She smiled, nodding slowly. Oh, that's interesting. Do you enjoy it? I guess, he replied, shrugging, eyes flicking toward his drink. She tilted her head, trying to find some common ground. I've always admired people who dive into their work. I studied physics, but sometimes I wonder what it would be like to work with your hands, building something real every day. He paused for a second, then replied, I have a degree too. Communications. She blinked, surprised. Oh, that's cool. I didn't expect that. She laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She was doing everything right, curious, engaged, warm. He remained neutral, detached, a quiet wall across from her. She asked about Netflix shows, favorite books, anything that might spark connection. He gave short answers, sometimes monosyllabic. Each time she shared a story, he nodded once, a gesture so minimal it almost erased the effort she had made. Have you always lived here? She asked, hoping for something personal. Whole life, he said. She offered a story about her childhood, growing up on a houseboat. Her parents studied whales, and she described the life and motion of the ocean with an enthusiasm that filled her voice. He interrupted almost immediately. Can you eat whales? She froze. No? Her smile faltered, unsure whether to continue. You okay? She asked softly, trying to gauge his mood. You're fine, he said, voice neutral. She laughed nervously, then tried to pivot. I also minored in music, so I wouldn't forget piano. I took a year just to play and never looked back. What kind of money do you make doing that? He asked bluntly, the words hanging like a wedge between them. Sorry? She said softly, confusion creeping in. Money, he repeated. She tried to dodge politely. It varies. He nodded. Once. That's what I figured. The waitress arrived with their meals. She tried to make light conversation about the menu, but he focused on his burger, complaining softly about the prices. She laughed lightly, attempting a joke, but he didn't respond. Every attempt she made to bridge the gap met with indifference. She offered anecdotes, playful questions, small glimpses into her personality, all of it absorbed minimally. I scribbled notes. One person reaches for connection, the other remains neutral. Nervous energy versus detached wall. She tried to engage with him about hobbies again. What sports do you play? High school. Could have gone pro if I wanted really, she said, eyes bright. What else? That's it, he said. The contrast was stark. She radiated hope, curiosity, vulnerability. He radiated detachment, a quiet refusal to participate in anything beyond necessity. The conversation limped forward, heavy with imbalance, each question and story a fragile bridge he refused to cross. By the end of the main course, her shoulders were slightly slumped, but she kept smiling, laughing, trying to salvage the evening, hoping for the spark that never came. By the time dessert menus arrived, it was clear she had exhausted most of her energy. Her questions had been careful, her stories light and engaging, her laughter soft and encouraging. Yet he remained largely unresponsive, offering nods, shrugs, or single-word answers. Every attempt to spark conversation bounced off him like a pebble against stone. She leaned forward, voice gentle, trying to recover some connection. If you could travel anywhere tomorrow, where would you go? Don't really travel, he said, shrugging again. She blinked, laughed nervously. Oh, okay. What about movies or shows? Anything you like? He studied the menu. Not really. Maybe sports. She forced a smile, trying to mask disappointment. She told him about a concert she had attended, the thrill of the crowd, the music vibrating through the floor, how it felt to be completely absorbed in something alive. He nodded once, absent-mindedly, eyes flicking toward his plate. I love music too, she continued softly, hoping to find common ground. I minored in piano, spent a year just playing, not thinking about anything else. What kind of money do you make from that? He asked suddenly. Blunt, the question landing like a cold splash. She paused. It varies, she replied carefully, masking hurt with politeness. He nodded. That's what I figured. She tried a joke, something light about dessert or the menu. It fell flat. He gave a faint grin, barely enough to register. She laughed lightly, waiting for reciprocity. It didn't come. I scribbled notes in my notebook. She gives warmth, humor, openness. He gives minimal acknowledgement. Every effort is one-sided. She asked again about hobbies. So, you play sports? Anything else? Nope, that's it. She tried harder, offering more about herself. Stories from school, childhood memories, small, playful anecdotes. He remained stoic, passive, a wall absorbing her energy without reflection. She tilted her head, hands clasped, trying to draw him into dialogue. Each pause, each question, each laugh was a gentle probe against a silent force. The waitress returned with drinks and small appetizers, and she attempted to include him, commenting on flavors and textures. He replied minimally, shrugging, barely registering her presence. Her posture softened slightly, shoulders relaxing. Yet she did not give up entirely. She still smiled, laughed, and shared little details, hoping to find a spark. His indifference remained unwavering. The imbalance between them was almost painful to watch. She radiated life, curiosity, and hope. He radiated calm, disinterest, and detachment. Each attempt at connection was a small, fragile bridge, and he refused to cross it. By the end of the appetizer, I realized she was performing not just for him, but for herself, to maintain grace, dignity, and hope, even when the other side refused to meet her halfway. The quiet struggle continued, a study in the perseverance of human effort against stubborn indifference. The main course had arrived, and the room smelled of sizzling seafood and roasted vegetables. She tried to use the food as a conversation starter, pointing out a dish or asking about preferences. Do you like seafood? She asked softly, hoping for a spark of engagement. I do, he replied. Just overpriced. She nodded politely, smiling, and tried to joke lightly about who would pay. Oh, I wasn't expecting you to pay. So you're paying? Cool, maybe I'll get something else, he said, almost lazily. Her laugh was gentle, a soft attempt at lightness. She waited for more, an acknowledgement, a playful retort, but it never came. He had no response beyond the faintest grin, barely registering, almost mechanical. She leaned back slightly, letting her hands rest on the table. Every ounce of effort she had put into the conversation, every story, every laugh, seemed absorbed into a void. She tried to pivot, asking about interests. What sports do you play? High school. Could have gone pro if I wanted, he replied. She blinked, surprised. Really? That's impressive. That's it, he said. Her hope dimmed slightly, but she persisted. She shared her love of music, the time she spent minoring in piano, her experiences learning physics, small anecdotes about her childhood. He occasionally nodded, but the gestures were minimal, devoid of engagement. The air between them felt heavier with each passing minute. I scribbled in my notebook. One person pouring warmth and life, the other absorbing nothing. Energy transfer impossible. She tried humor again, making light of the menu, commenting on flavors, playful hypotheticals about desert islands and books. He gave flat responses or ignored the question entirely. She tilted her head, trying to read him, to find some spark of curiosity, but it never came. At one point, she asked about Netflix shows, hoping for common ground. He studied his plate, avoiding eye contact. She laughed nervously, asking another question about favorite books or hobbies, soft and careful. He replied with a simple nod or shrug. I noticed her hands fidgeting, twisting the napkin into a small knot, a subtle expression of nervous energy. She maintained composure, smiling, laughing lightly, but her eyes betrayed a hint of disappointment. The effort she put into bridging the gap contrasted starkly with his wall-like detachment. Servers moved past, clearing plates, delivering orders. Other diners chatted and laughed. In their corner, a quiet struggle played out. A determined human attempting connection, met with indifference so complete it bordered on the absurd. She glanced briefly at her wine, taking a slow sip. Her posture remained composed, her voice polite, but the energy that had filled her at the beginning of the evening was waning. And yet, she didn't give up entirely. She continued to offer stories, smiles, and gentle questions, holding on to the fragile hope that he might finally meet her halfway. The dessert menu arrived, carried by a waitress who seemed unaware of the tension brewing in the booth. She tried to use it as an opportunity to lighten the mood. Everything looks amazing, she said, her eyes bright. Do you have a favorite? Not really, he replied, glancing at the list briefly before returning to his plate. She laughed softly, trying to fill the gap. I usually go for chocolate. It's hard to resist. He nodded once. Sure. The conversation limped along, every word a small victory for her, yet met with minimal engagement from him. She tried asking about books, hoping for some spark, a hint of curiosity, or a story. He gave a short answer, almost indifferent. I watched her hands, lightly tapping the table, twisting the napkin, small motions that betrayed her nervous energy. She laughed at her own jokes, hoping he might join, but he remained a quiet observer, contributing little. Each attempt she made to bridge the gap felt like a fragile thread, pulled taut with her effort, unreciprocated, threatening to snap. She leaned closer, voice soft. If you could meet anyone in history, who would it be? He shrugged. Don't know. She blinked, forcing a polite smile. Okay, how about movies? Anything you like? He glanced at the menu again. Not really. Maybe sports? She nodded, letting the silence settle. Then she shared a story about attending a concert, the music vibrating through the floor, the crowd's energy lifting her spirits. He nodded once, brief and distracted, eyes flicking away. Her persistence continued. She described her music studies, her minor in piano, the year she spent just playing without thinking about the future. His interest remained minimal, each acknowledgement brief, almost perfunctory. She laughed at a small joke she made about desert islands and books, waiting for a spark. Nothing. He responded minimally, a faint grin, then returned to his burger. She tried to keep the conversation alive, gently weaving anecdotes from childhood, favorite hobbies, small humor. I scribbled in my notebook. Her effort is total, his attention, partial. One person gives light, the other absorbs shadows. She smiles through it all. By the time dessert arrived, her shoulders were slightly slumped, but she kept smiling, continuing to ask questions, sharing stories. Each small response from him, a nod, a faint grin, was a quiet triumph she tried to savor, though the imbalance was clear. Servers moved efficiently around them, the restaurant alive with chatter and clinking dishes. In their corner, a quiet battle of energy and indifference unfolded. She radiated warmth, engagement, hope. He radiated calm, detachment, minimal participation. Even with the weight of the evening pressing down, she maintained composure. Every question she asked, every laugh she shared, was an act of resilience, an effort to create connection despite constant imbalance. And yet, it was exhausting to witness. The one-sidedness almost palpable, like a tide rolling against a sheer cliff. By now, the evening had settled into a rhythm, her trying, him largely unmoved. Each story she told, each question she asked, required a small act of bravery. Each short, indifferent reply from him felt like a small collapse of hope, yet she persisted. "Do you like traveling?" she asked, gently, hoping to find a thread of curiosity. "Not really," he said, shrugging. She blinked, smiling politely. "All right. Favorite books or movies?" He looked at his plate. "Not much." "Sports, I guess." She let a small laugh escape, soft and nervous, then tried to pivot to music. "I spent a year just playing piano, not thinking about anything else. It was freeing money?" he asked suddenly, cutting through the flow. She paused. It varies." He nodded once, satisfied. She tried humor, a playful hypothetical about desert islands and books. He gave a faint smile, minimal, and returned to eating. She tilted her head slightly, watching for any spark of engagement, any sign of curiosity, any willingness to participate in dialogue. None appeared. I scribbled in my notebook. Her energy, full. His energy, negligible. Conversation, one-way street. Hope, persistent. She shared anecdotes from school, childhood, moments of laughter with friends, even small embarrassing stories. He remained quiet, occasionally nodding, a faint acknowledgement, but nothing more. Each attempt to connect seemed absorbed into a void. The restaurant buzzed around them. Servers moved past, other diners laughed and conversed. Their booth felt isolated in its imbalance, like a bubble where one person's warmth collided with the other's detachment. She tried one last bridge. "If you could do anything tomorrow, what would it be?" He shrugged. "Nothing special." Her shoulders sank slightly, but her smile remained polite. Each tiny response he offered became a small victory she clung to, even if the overall energy remained lopsided. She leaned forward, trying to sustain the connection, her laughter lighter, stories shorter, questions gentler, hoping to coax a spark out of him. The dessert arrived, a small plate of chocolate and fruit. She picked at it, attempting a comment about flavors. He replied minimally, returning to the food with a faint nod. She laughed softly at her own joke, and for a brief moment he gave a slight grin, enough for her to feel the tiniest flicker of triumph. Even as the imbalance persisted, she maintained her composure. Her effort never faltered completely, and her courage to engage was admirable. She radiated life, energy, curiosity, while he remained still, a quiet wall of indifference absorbing it all. By the time coffee arrived, her persistence was admirable, yet the one-sidedness of their interaction hung over the booth like a heavy, invisible curtain. By the time coffee arrived, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. She had exhausted most of her energy in trying to coax engagement from him. The stories she told, the jokes she offered, the gentle questions, all had been met with minimal response. Yet she maintained a calm, polite composure. Laughing softly, keeping her posture open, hands lightly resting on the table. "Do you have any hobbies outside of sports?" she asked, leaning slightly forward. "Not really," he replied. She blinked, then nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Okay. Music? Reading? Anything at all?" "Sometimes I watch TV," he said, eyes on his cup. She laughed lightly, a soft sound, trying to fill the space, keep the conversation alive. She shared small stories from her childhood, her favorite teachers, the summer she spent learning piano, moments that had shaped her curiosity. He nodded occasionally, minimal acknowledgement, eyes occasionally flicking toward the window or the menu. I scribbled notes. Her energy persists. His participation remains partial. Conversation is a fragile, one-way bridge. She tried to bridge the gap with humor again. "If you were stuck on a desert island, what book would you bring?" He shrugged. "I don't read much." She blinked, laughing nervously. "Okay, fair enough." She pivoted to lighter topics, commenting on flavors of coffee, desserts, trying playful hypotheticals, small imaginative questions, all aimed at creating a spark. He remained mostly detached, giving faint nods or brief replies. Yet each minimal acknowledgement she received was a tiny victory she tried to savor, holding onto it with gentle grace. She reflected silently, noticing the contrast. Her warmth, curiosity, and energy radiated across the table, while his indifference formed a wall, absorbing her efforts without returning them. The imbalance was stark, almost palpable, and yet she did not give up entirely. Her perseverance, patience, and courage to remain engaged in the face of minimal reciprocation were remarkable. Servers moved efficiently around them, plates clinking, voices rising and falling. Other diners laughed and talked, immersed in reciprocal conversation. In their corner, the one-sided struggle continued quietly. She continued sharing stories, asking questions, laughing gently, holding on to hope that he might finally participate fully. Even in quiet moments, the gap remained. She reflected inwardly, maintaining her dignity while navigating the exhausting dance of trying to create connection where minimal effort was returned. Yet there was grace in her persistence, a quiet strength in her willingness to keep engaging, hoping for a spark that might never come. By now, the restaurant was in full swing. Servers moved quickly between tables, laughter and chatter filled the air, the clinking of silverware creating a lively soundtrack. In their corner, however, a quiet, almost imperceptible struggle persisted. She leaned slightly forward, still radiating warmth, curiosity, and hope. He remained mostly still, a subtle wall of indifference absorbing her every effort. She attempted a playful anecdote about a childhood summer trip, describing the smell of the sea and the feeling of wind on her face. She smiled, watching for any spark of recognition or engagement from him. He gave a faint nod, glanced at his plate, and returned to sipping his drink. Trying to bridge the gap further, she asked about favorite movies, subtly hoping to ignite common ground. "Do you like comedies?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," he replied. She laughed lightly, masking the slight disappointment in her chest. She pivoted to music, describing her minor in piano, the freedom of spending a year just playing without thinking about grades or expectations. He nodded once, briefly, as though checking a box, then looked away. I scribbled in my notebook. Her effort, luminous. His attention, minimal. Conversation, a delicate, fragile construction, mostly one-sided. She tried another bridge, a hypothetical question about traveling anywhere in the world. He shrugged. "Don't really travel?" Her shoulders slumped slightly, though she maintained her polite composure. She reflected inwardly on the contrast, the one person giving life to the moment, the other merely existing within it. She laughed at her own small jokes, waited for a response, and received a faint smile. That small acknowledgement, almost imperceptible, was enough to keep her trying. The dessert plates had been cleared. Coffee sat steaming in front of them, the faint aroma mingling with the scent of roasted bread and chocolate in the air. She spoke of books, childhood memories, funny mishaps at school, little details that revealed her personality. He responded, minimally, sometimes with a nod, sometimes with monosyllables. Each acknowledgement was fleeting, barely enough to keep the bridge from collapsing entirely. Other diners moved past, engrossed in their own conversations. She laughed softly at a story she told, hoping to catch even a glimmer of his attention. He remained calm, detached, sipping coffee, returning the faintest acknowledgement only when necessary. By the end of the evening, the contrast was stark. She had given everything she could: energy, curiosity, humor, stories, and warmth. He had given little more than acknowledgement and minimal engagement. Yet she persisted, quietly, gracefully, maintaining her composure, radiating hope in the face of persistent indifference. As the evening stretched on, the quiet imbalance between them became more pronounced. She continued to share stories, anecdotes from her childhood, small details about her passions, and playful hypotheticals. Each effort was met with minimal acknowledgement, a nod, or a brief, monosyllabic response. She leaned slightly forward, attempting to spark engagement. "Have you ever thought about learning something new, like an instrument or a language?" "Not really," he said, shrugging. She blinked, smiled politely, then continued. "I recently started learning a new piece on piano, something challenging but fun. It's exciting to push yourself, don't you think?" He gave a faint nod. "Sure." Her energy remained high, but the contrast was undeniable. She radiated curiosity, warmth, and hope. He radiated calm, detachment, and minimal effort. I scribbled in my notebook. One person's engagement is relentless, the other's participation is optional at best. She tried humor again, telling a small joke about books and desert islands, attempting to provoke a spark. He gave a faint grin, nearly imperceptible, and returned to his coffee. She tilted her head slightly, gauging his reaction, hoping for a glimpse of curiosity or engagement, but it never fully appeared. The air around their booth seemed heavier with each passing minute. Servers moved efficiently, other diners laughed, and the restaurant buzzed with energy. In contrast, their corner remained a quiet, uneven battle between human effort and indifference. She asked another question about travel, movies, and hobbies, each attempt delicate and careful. His responses remained minimal, brief, a wall that absorbed her energy without giving back. Yet she persisted, smiling softly, laughing lightly, and maintaining composure. By now, I could see her patience fraying subtly. Her hands occasionally fidgeted with a napkin or her cup, tiny signs of mounting tension. Still, she never lost her poise entirely, continuing to radiate warmth and engage with gentle persistence. She reflected inwardly, noting the stark imbalance, yet refusing to abandon hope. Each small acknowledgement he offered, a faint smile, a brief nod, was enough to keep her trying, despite the overwhelming disparity. The evening was nearing its end. Dessert cleared, coffee nearly finished, and the faint buzz of other diners created a backdrop for this one-sided struggle. She continued to offer stories, laughs, and gentle questions, holding on to the fragile hope that the night might somehow shift. Even with the imbalance so clear, her perseverance was admirable, a quiet determination to engage fully, despite repeated indifference from across the table. The night was winding down. Coffee cups were nearly empty, dessert plates cleared, and the soft glow of the restaurant lights cast long shadows across the booth. She sat upright, hands folded lightly on the table, trying to maintain the composure she had carried throughout the evening. "Did you have a good night?" she asked softly, testing the waters. "Yeah, this was chill," he replied, shrugging. Her smile faltered slightly. "I'm glad. I enjoyed talking with you." He waved vaguely. "You too." "I'll text you." She exhaled quietly, a small release of tension. She had tried so hard, stories, laughter, questions, warmth, but the effort had been almost entirely one-sided. Her energy, hope, and curiosity had met with a minimal engagement from him. Yet she had maintained grace, politeness, and composure throughout. She stood, carefully smoothing her blouse, and offered a small nod. "Well, have a good night." He gave a faint wave, turning his attention back to the remaining coffee. I watched her leave the booth, walking toward the exit with measured steps, holding onto her dignity despite the imbalance of the evening. He remained seated, finishing his burger, absorbed in his own quiet world, seemingly untouched by the effort she had poured into the conversation. There was something almost cinematic about the scene, the juxtaposition of persistent hope and detached indifference. She had given everything she could: humor, curiosity, warmth, vulnerability. He had given minimal acknowledgement, a nod here, a faint smile there, sufficient only to avoid outright rudeness. I jotted my final note. Human effort versus indifference. Courage and grace in one corner, passive detachment in the other. One person tries to ignite connection, the other refuses to participate fully. As the door closed behind her, he remained seated, calm, eating slowly. The restaurant continued its lively buzz, conversations overlapping, laughter filling the space. Yet their corner had held a quiet, one-sided struggle, invisible to most but palpable to anyone watching closely. I left shortly after, notebook full of observations, thoughts, and reflections on human interaction. That night stayed with me, not for drama or conflict, but for the quiet courage of someone trying to create connection where minimal effort was returned. The memory of her persistence, grace, and hope lingered, a reminder that even in imbalance, human effort shines. Thank you for watching. I hope this story gave you a glimpse into the courage, hope, and patience it takes to connect with someone. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe for more stories about the small, fascinating moments of everyday life. Your support means a lot.